This segment is called Climate Innovation Through Logic, exploring UN SDG 13, taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. This fireside chat that we have coming up now is with two really incredible humans that I'm excited to feature. It's called The Road to COP27, Pathways to Deep Systems Redesign. And it's featuring our panel host, Krista Grigori from Leaders on Purpose, who's CEO and co-founder of an incredible initiative that's dear to my heart. Leaders on Purpose is an organization dedicated to supporting multinational organizations to transition to become more sustainable through embedding purpose at the core of strategy. They work with some of the world's leading CEOs, multilateral leaders, and policymakers to support this work. Krista leads by example. Throughout her career, she's led innovative, transformative projects, including external stakeholder engagement and partnership development, maximizing value for organizations and their stakeholders. Over the past 5 years as CEO of Leaders on Purpose, she's worked with the world's most inspiring leaders and CEOs from a whole roster of Fortune 1000 companies. She and her team have developed insights, approaches, and methodologies to support leaders to embed purpose at the core of their business strategies. As a founding member of Unilever's North American Sustainability Council, Krista has worked with leaders across 5 continents on various development projects. She's the winner of the TED Global Unilever Innovation Award, and in 2018 was named a Conscious Leader of the Year by Conscious Company magazine. Stefan, who Krista will be in conversation with this morning, is an impact investor, advisor, and advocate for climate action and social impact. He's a partner at Full Cycle, a fund that is investing to scale climate technologies and infrastructure, where he brings over 15 years of investment experience. He formerly founded an advisory practice for family offices and impact investors, and was a principal investor in the $5 billion redevelopment of LaGuardia Airport. He serves on several boards, including Project Drawdown, Future of Cities, and Monument Lab. Really looking forward to this conversation. Take it away, you two. Oh, have we got Krista on here? Let's see, where is she? I don't actually see her, so we might kickstart the conversation and let her step in as she arrives. Stefan, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Live TV, folks. We'll get Krista online in a moment.
Well, I can certainly step in for the moment while we wait. I'll make sure that she gets here. The first question, though, that I'm very lucky to have Krista's questions in my back pocket. So the first question that Krista has for you, Stefan, is coming out of this last year COP26 event in Glasgow. We had a lot of hope for real action. And we also saw some new faces at the summit, many new faces, in fact, such as many people from the capital markets. What was your takeaway from this event?
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, I think Krista was wise to start with that question because there's a lot to talk about. I guess maybe to set the stage quickly for everyone's benefit. So COP26 was a global gathering in Glasgow, Scotland last year. And it was really kind of it was touted as our last best chance to take climate action. I don't know if I agree that it's our last best chance, but I do think it was a pivotal moment where we needed to see the results of our actions post the Paris Accord, and then identify what it is we need to level up on and do in order to meaningfully avoid the worst climate outcomes. And so, there's a lot of success, there's a lot of disappointment. I think ultimately, it was several, hey, Krista.
I had this, my invite was for 3:30. I apologize. It's so good to see you. How are you?
Okay.
Very, very well.
I was just in the middle of answering the first question that I had in my back pocket. So I'll leave it to you.
Oh, terrific. Okay, so have we started already? Okay, good. What was the question? Sorry.
We're right on board. So we're just talking about COP26 and COP27. and some of the takeaways. So let me get into the meat of the question. So I think, one of the takeaways is that we finally now have enough of the scientific understanding and consensus around the problem that we can start to design or better our approach and solutions that will work. So for example, the scientific community has known for years that methane is many multiple times a problem gas than CO2, and that we humans are emitting in our oil and gas infrastructure, in our waste infrastructure, in our agricultural infrastructure. And yet, from Paris 5 years ago to today, we hadn't really had mechanisms for countries, for industry, for companies to reduce their methane emissions, right? So we weren't targeting the most harmful, one of the most harmful gases acutely enough, and we were all talking about CO2, which occurs naturally in our hydrology and our ecosystems. So the fact that out of Glasgow, we have a methane pledge that dictates to its signatories to make every effort to reduce methane by 30% is a big deal. It is also insufficient, right? We are past the point where we can kind of do half measures and then test them out every couple of years to see how we've done. We really do have to take drastic action. And so one of the takeaways from Glasgow is that there were some transformational commitments that were signed onto, and all of them are insufficient as singular actions to get the job done. This really is going to be an all hands on deck effort. And we're going to have to use the framework out of Glasgow as a scaffold. That is to say, it is the basement floor of what we should be attempting to achieve. And our ambitions should be far grander, should be far more expansive. And so, that was one of the takeaways, right? Is that multilaterals, governments, agencies, even corporates, industry players won't get the job done individually or even as sectors. This really has to be an integrated effort. And that's what a few folks out of COP are really starting to coalesce around, which is what's the integrated here. Yeah. The last takeaway I'll say from, not the last, but the last thing I'll share here for takeaways is that we can't forget that all of our transformational moments in human history, the transition moments from print to digital, from rail to automobile, from automobile to electric, all of these transitions require capital, and a lot of it. And so if we're making plans for drastic, wide-reaching climate action, and we don't have capital at the center, how do capital providers, investors, financiers, insurance providers, how does everyone come in their most efficacious way to deploy capital? We'll miss the mark. So we really got to start thinking about how we deploy capital and the mechanisms and pathways by which capital can come to bear, and then really activate those while we still have time to take some drastic actions and avert a 2 to 2.5 degree world, which will be a world we don't recognize and none of us want to live into.
Absolutely, absolutely. So agree with you. And really to that point, I think one of the things we saw in COP this year was we saw some new faces. For one, we saw a lot of people from the capital market showing up, and some really, from my perspective, some very promising, commitments. Some, you've been involved with GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which was launched by Mark Carney in April of this last year, with the aim of galvanizing the financial sectors. I think there's 450 financial institutions involved with that in 45 countries, representing 130 billion. And so I know you've been involved in this, and could you talk a little bit about this and what the aims are and some of your work in this space?
Yeah, of course. GFANZ is an important pillar in how we organize the private capital markets towards coordinated action, right? And I think it goes a long way to kind of identify and grow what could be a new model for sustainable development. Let me take a step back and just kind of, for our audience here, set the stage, which is, climate is a systems issue. The conceit for this conference is around logic. And so if we're thinking logically, you've got to start at your base layer where you have the systems that operate in the background that are operating to turn on the lights in this room and to push water through your faucet as you turn on the faucet. All of these systems operate in the background, and the problem is that they are too emissions intensive, right? To turn on this light is probably a coal-fired plant 20 miles away, spewing particulate matter, methane, and nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide into the air as it operates, but we need power to operate our global economy. And so GFANs can play a role in what that transition looks like, and more importantly, the speed of that transition. We have such a gargantuan undertaking in terms of turning over all of our aging 19th and 20th century infrastructure. We're going to need trillions of dollars to get it done. And so one small thing to note is GFANs actually represents $130 trillion of assets under management. But what we really should keep our eyes on, and what I think a few members of the organization are really keen to make sure is the case, is what's the actual number of capital, the actual amount of capital that is pointed at climate solutions exclusively. That number is far smaller. And so thinking about kind of the relationship between $130 trillion of assets under management and the amount of capital that might be $1.3 trillion pointed at clean energy and infrastructure solutions for climate, that relationship that ratio rather has to get better, right? And it is entirely possible to do so. It's just going to take some work, both within the membership of GFANs and by growing that membership of GFANs. And so there's a lot of potential. I guess I say all that to say there's a lot of potential in this kind of amalgamation of private capital to do this work. Now it's about how we bring that to life, how we activate it, and how we create pathways for that capital to actually go out and be deployed into climate restoration, into climate infrastructure that can help us transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as part of that, the 130 trillion is, to your point, broadly supposed to be focused on infrastructure, on climate, but 2/3 of that needs to go into the developing and emerging markets as well, right? So we need pathways for that last mile and some of that. One of the things, okay, so we're hearing a lot of talk and we're seeing a lot of really promising progress in the capital markets, but from my feeling is that there's still a lot of confusion. We're just getting together this, some of the reporting initiatives so that we can get some sort of more standardized reporting, which I think is very promising. But from your perspective as an investor in this space, what do you think that decision makers really need to understand as they're directing their decisions and directing their capital towards real investment that really matters?
Yeah, I mean, this is an important question. It's an important question for this audience as well, right? I think, the status quo, the easy thing to do is business as usual, right? And to make it someone else's problem, to not consider the externalities of doing business as we typically do, or as investing as we typically do. That's the easy thing to do. Leadership, especially as it pertains to climate action, especially as it pertains to the things that we can do as decision makers, is difficult. It's hard, and it's often lonely, scary, and uncertain. That is to say, you might make a decision as a leader, as a policymaker, as an investor, as a fiduciary, and you may not be able to go back to your board or your investment committee or your constituents and actually sell it and say, hey, this is for our better interest, even though there's an upfront cost or even though there's some sacrifice we've got to make. The point that I'm making is that leaders should still make those decisions, right? There's a level of bravery now that we have to exhibit in our actions. And thankfully, we are in community, right? No one has to do that alone. If you're an investor, there are tons of investor communities like Creo and Tonic and Nexus, where you can be in community to actually understand how others are approaching the issue, and participate in solutions with them. And even as corporate leaders kind of face all of this together, there are now frameworks. You can see them from CDP, WRI, and of course, Project Drawdown, that give an opportunity for folks to see pathways for corporate action, for climate action. So there's now more mechanisms to take that brave step forward into thinking about how you transform business, how you make better decisions. And I will say, part of the human call here is to be better ancestors, right? And if you are in this moment in time, position of leadership, in a position of power, you have a mantle that no one's ever had before, right? Like, we've never faced a problem this intractable as humans ever. And that includes COVID, that includes the plague in the 1600s. I mean, we really haven't, the 16th century, we really haven't had a problem this large to face. And so, it is going to take those of us who have positions of leadership to make hard decisions, and to do so in a way that is sustainable. And so it's funny to use that word. I don't necessarily mean sustainability as we think of it. I mean, to say, put in place structures, governance structures, leadership teams, and mechanisms that will endure, and that will for sure last longer than our tenure in these positions, and perhaps even our tenure on planet Earth. We have to make decisions now, the outcomes of which we may never see. And that's a difficult thing to wrap our minds around, but it's important to do so, especially in this moment in time where we have a closing window of opportunity to really make a meaningful difference in the trajectory of our planet and the trajectory of humanity.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I would build on that a little bit to say that I think everyone is in a leadership position in some capacity. If you're an adult living in this era, there is something that you can do to do this. And it will, to your earlier point, it is an all hands on deck. So as an employee, as in any capacity, one of the things that we, GFANS and the work that's being done there is around capital markets, and we've got pension holders in there. And if you are somebody, who's got a pension, I mean, you can do something about this call. And the other thing I would say, to build on what you're saying, is that there's never been more support, right? I think that is one thing. That there's support from the consumers, from the employees. I work with private sector leaders. They are really hungry for solutions. And so I think we live in a time now when I feel that we've hit an inflection point, and there's support for this, but there's confusion, and there's, because we are pioneering a new pathway, something we've never done before. And so that brings me to your work at Full Cycle, because I think that you have the work that you're doing there, I think, can really help people in this space. And so I'd love for us to talk a little bit about your work there. I wonder if you could just maybe share a little bit for the audience here.
Sure. It is a good segue. I mean, so Full Cycle is a growth equity and real assets investment vehicle. We are in the business of investing in climate technologies that have the capacity to scale, and deploying those technologies into the market and accelerating their adoption. So think new ways of generating or storing power, new ways of building circularity into our global systems, so that we have less waste and can utilize waste as a fuel or as a feedstock for other industrial practices. New mechanisms for controlled environments where we can grow food, nutritious food locally, and diminish the excessive carbon footprint of our food systems today. So we invest in all of these things. And part of our strategy is really to identify and work with the dimension of time. And that is to say, to invest along a venture timeline, we would miss the mark. We would take too long to get technologies out of the lab, piloted, and into commercial application. So our strategy really is to focus on technologies that are market ready, things that we can scale tomorrow. And indeed, we've been able to start our strategy and have made 5 fantastic investments that are each originating projects, that are each originating expressions of their technologies into the market that we can point to and say, hey, this is a better way of dealing with our seemingly intractable plastic waste issue. We can take plastic and turn it into molecules of value all over again and never have to refine oil to make new plastics. We don't have to be doing things the way we are, because the technology now that's ready for market is good enough. And we can actually install it into the ground. We can actually deploy capital to the tunes of billions of dollars into this sector, into these sectors. And so our work is a little bit of a different approach. And it's one that is meant to give us a line of sight into what that near future really can look like, what it could be comprised of, how we can have circularity in our fashion industry, in waste, in our food sector, and really express that into the market in a meaningful enough way that others in the market, that much larger players than us, will also say, hey, that's the model by which we should do sustainable development. It's not about hunting for the next unicorn in in ag or in waste, right? That's a fool's errand. If we were to do that and go just the venture approach, we would have made a lot of wealth for a lot of folks, and we'd still have a scaling climate crisis that's hurting people around the world. So our work is really defined by the urgency of this moment. It's also defined by a technology subset, operators, entrepreneurs that are world-class, that are fantastic in doing this work because it's very meaningful to them. And we're their partner to go out and say, okay, once you're ready for market, we can go out and scale your technology faster with more effective means than anyone's ever done before. And so, I wake up every day, I pop up out of bed and I want to know, what's happening in the market, what can I learn new in climate that I don't already know? And most importantly, how can I live into the world with my value set of taking climate action and doing everything I possibly can to effectuate it, to actually implement it into the world. And I'm lucky enough that we have a fund that is doing this work on the behalf of global investors, institutions, and others that trust us, that really see the opportunity, not just to do the work, but realize that we can't all do it in kind of a scattershot approach. We're unfortunately past the time where we can do less harm. It is now about doing prioritized, ordered good, and our strategy is identifying those priorities and what solutions can map to the most problematic areas in our global economy first, second, and third. And we're going out and deploying capital to do that. It's I love our work. Yeah, to learn more, go to fullcycle.com. It's we're really excited to be leading this charge and doing the work with some really great partners as well.
Yeah, I love that, and I really I love the approach and the idea. I think a lot of people think of sustainability and net zero and all of this as sort of doing doing less bad, as you said, or doing without, but what you're talking about is innovation, and there's such remarkable innovation being done out there. And so finding these market-ready innovators in these key areas. Now, if we could just talk a little bit, I know you've done so much research on this, so that's why I wanted to dig into it. If you could just talk a little bit more about how do you find these, and how do you determine sort of what are the key areas that you're going to focus on, and then how do you find these innovators? Because I have a feeling we might have a few in the audience. So,
indeed, yeah. I mean, so you're hitting on kind of one of the best parts of my job, which is we get to do and have these conversations with folks that are value aligned, that we care about, but we do so in such a public way that a lot of times innovators and entrepreneurs will come to us and say, hey, we think we're ready for your model. We've built a pilot plant. We have a demonstration of our technology. We're ready to commercialize, and we'd like you to be our partner. So the inbound is rich, and we're very thankful for that. I think, though, it's really important to have a framework that allows us to be not only good investors, but good decision makers as to what technologies can map to the problematic areas in our economy. And so to do that, we actually had to go back to the science. And what we did is we said, okay, well, where are the most harmful climate pollutants being emitted in abundance in our global economy? And where are the solutions that can map to those problem areas? So a little bit earlier, I talked about methane. So we should stick with that example. Methane is emitted by our oil and gas infrastructure. It's emitted from anything that rots. So waste is a big source of methane. And agriculture, because of waste and because of practices in use, is also a source of methane. Methane in its first 20 years is 6 times more heat trapping than CO2. So all things being equal, we should be focusing on methane 86 times more than we are focusing on CO2 in terms of the abatement and reduction of emissions that we're attempting to effectuate. And so we go back to the science to say, okay, what are these shorter-lived climate pollutants? How do we map solutions to them? And then we go out and say, okay, we're really looking for a solution here in the oil and gas industry, here in the agriculture industry, here in the waste industry. So our thesis is driven by the science. And then we go out and actually have a much smaller universe to understand in terms of not just solutions and technologies, but operators, right? We've got to be excellent investors at scaling these technologies and partnering with companies that have the capacity to meaningfully apply their technology and their technologies have to have the capacity to scale. And scale is something it's a word we throw around a lot, but really, talking about the abatement of gigatons of emissions is a gargantuan effort. It requires billions of dollars. And so part of what we do that's a big differentiator is that we don't just invest in the companies. When we invest in a company, we also sign rights to develop their project pipeline. And what that does is that smooths the path of deployment of the tech. It smooths the path of commercialization so that companies don't have to say, hey, we're going to go out and build a new waste to value plant in California, but we need $40 million and we're going to spend 2 years cobbling together that 40 million from grants and from investors and from debt providers. And so that deployment gap, the gap from which a company is not yet big enough to go out to the public markets or to go to the big banks for large amounts of financing, but their technology is ready for market, that's where we play. That's where we come in and say, okay, we realize that you're not yet commercialized, but we also see the promise of your technology. We'll be your partner for the next $1 billion of build out so that we can build your first 5, 6, 7 installations of your technology. And when they're up and running and working, then you're big enough to go out to the public markets and to the larger pools of capital to build projects 10 through 50. And by doing so, we accelerate technologies that can fundamentally change our relationship, our human relationship to waste, our human relationship to energy, our human relationship to food. All of this is up for transformation, but it can't be a 20, 30, 40-year transformation. We really do have to accelerate these technologies. And so we built a model to do just that and solve the pain points that companies face in doing so, all while delivering financial returns for our LPs. So kind of in that Venn diagram is where we operate. And we hope that others will follow our model and also deploy capital in this manner as well.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. One of the things that you need for this, you've got these innovators, now you've got the capital, and we've got the innovation and this is kind of where we work, is really working with multinational organizations, large private sector organizations. And as we're seeing these companies step up with commitments and they've got tremendous traction behind the commitments themselves. We're seeing, boards such as the board of Shell, we're seeing boards turnover. So climate competent boards are really critical. But one of the things that these organizations can do in addition, and you and I have talked about this, in addition to just, these commitments and maybe, and using their influence in the supply chain is off-taker, commitments. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what that is, how that works, and how that really supports this type of innovation.
Yeah, it's such an important point, Krista. So, corporates, big Fortune 500 companies, or even smaller private companies, oftentimes see kind of 1 or 2 opportunities to really participate in a low carbon transition. And that typically, takes the form of kind of signing on to commitments and then hoping to decarbonize their value chains where they can. We'll use less water, we'll produce less waste, we'll make sure our energy comes from renewable sources. All of that's really great. But ultimately, scale means that corporates have perhaps a different role to play in a low carbon transition. The other mechanism that gets brought up a lot for corporations are carbon credits or carbon offsets. Again, part of the patchwork of solutions that folks should access, but they shouldn't be used as kind of permits to pollute. So, or excuses to pollute. We can keep business as usual and then buy up a bunch of credits. So there has to be more and new mechanisms by which corporations can partake in a low carbon transition. And one of them is to think through what is the energy mix and infrastructure mix of a low carbon world that we serve. And if we're thinking about de-risking technologies, then who can participate in either providing the feedstock or the offtake for whatever is being produced for a clean energy transition. So for instance, if you have a waste to energy plant, who's providing that waste, right? Is it possible that me, a consumer products company CEO, can transform where we divert our waste stream so that we know we're not participating in landfill waste and instead we're participating in a fully circular solution for that waste? And if there's power being produced on the back end, can we be an off-taker of that power and sign a 25-year or a 10-year power purchase agreement so that there's some stability, right, for the new infrastructure that needs to get off the ground? And so corporations play a unique role. They are operators in our global economy. Industry plays a unique role. These are industrial players that are producing value in our global economy. And through small but significant changes in where they get or how they take or what they provide to new infrastructure can play a critical role in de-risking that infrastructure. That makes my job as an investor a lot easier, right? I can underwrite infrastructure that has offtake agreements, that has the economics of how they operate locked in place for 40 years, or 20 years. I can underwrite that a lot better than uncertain technologies. And so the bigger message here is that everyone, and everyone includes entities, corporations, governments, everyone can and should play a role in this transition, but not everyone plays the same role. And so it's not just about capital, it's about where you can fit in and add the most value to a low carbon transition, identifying those pathways and then effectuating them in and throughout an organization so that there's an opportunity for us to actually have a pathway to a much less amount of warming than we're on the track for today.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, we have a few minutes left, and I think we've got some time for some questions. Let's see, do we have any questions in the does anybody have any questions? Let's look in the chat. What have we got here? I think, let's see. Give it a few minutes. Okay, here's a question. Do the COP26 agreements have teeth, i.e. punishments for backing out of a commitment, for example?
Yeah. So this is, it's a good question, actually.
Yeah.
So the answer is fundamentally no. And this is kind of to my earlier point of no single entity or kind of entities or group of entities can solve this problem. The United Nations plays a big role as a global organizing force that can pull everyone into the room to sign these commitments. But ultimately, there are no kind of accountability measures or teeth, as the question puts it, to force action on the behalf of the signatories to the agreements. Everyone's coming in good faith, and the idea is that you take best efforts. It is one of the most critical flaws in these global gatherings. I would say that, so I'm an eternal optimist. So you want to believe everyone's coming to the table to do everything they possibly can, because this really is a problem that affects everyone. But what we observed while we were both there in Glasgow, and what we observed is that there are many interests at play and the status quo isn't going to disappear quietly into the night. That's not going to be how we transition, right? We're going to have to push countries and corporates and industrial players, investors and multilaterals to continually show and demonstrate action. And really the mechanism is that as we gather every year, right, the headline for our panel here is the road to COP27. So part of the road to COP27 is identifying what actionable steps can be taken in this kind of 10, 12-month period, and then figure out what we do to demonstrate those actions to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which is where COP27 will be held. So we do need new mechanisms for accountability, but at the very least, now we've got enough of the global community involved. I think COP26 was probably the biggest of the COPs, right? There's 28,000 people that came together. I think now we have enough of a global community that if you're not doing the things you said you were going to do, there's no place to hide, as it were. You can't kind of shove that under the rug and hope no one will notice, because we have the science and the data, we have the sensors, we know what we're looking for in terms of action. Now it's about time to be accountable to those actions. And so, you know, the question is a brilliant one because it points to one of the flaws and failings of these global gatherings. I will say as a final piece to it, the private sector can play a key role to filling those gaps. And if a public corporation or a pension or an asset manager has to report by virtue of its governance and its structures of accountability, then we should include climate action across the board in how they do so. And that's another way we can have accountability of teeth in the things we commit to.
Yeah, such a great answer. And I would just build on that to say, you know, in addition to accountability from coming out of the signatories, you know, each of us works at a company or is engaged, we're all consumers. I think one of the things that we wanted to say at the end were what are the things you can do? And this question really leads to that, which is vote. You can, you know, vote with your talent, vote with your dollar, vote with your actual vote. But, you know, we all have a say in this. And so for those signatories that don't meet their, you know, that don't meet their commitments, first of all, you know, it's to understand why they haven't met their commitments, because this is a complex situation. And if we can show that there's progress and that there's some kind of a holdup that we can unblock, some of that can be really good learning for everybody, because we don't want to punish those people that are going first and maybe taking the risk to make a commitment. You know, we don't want to encourage people to be too safe. It's time for courageous commitments with the recognition that we're not always going to be able to meet what we've said. But as long as we're making progress and quickly sharing progress with others, I think it's all in the spirit of innovation. Greenwashing, clearly, no, you know, that's a very different situation. But I would just build on that. We have another really good question here. Sure. This comes from Sven Anders. How can family offices, impact investors, and philanthropists provide catalytic funding, and where can we invest? Really good. Really good question.
Yeah, really good question. And I'd say, you know, that highlights one of the perhaps shortcomings or gaps rather within a membership like GFANZ. The family office community has largely been excluded from some of the membership groups. And I think that's a mistake, but it's one we can correct. Family offices play a key role, and philanthropy plays a key role in de-risking. And what I mean by that is by taking early enough bets on technologies, on kinds of investments that are climate restoring or climate related and climate positive. You know, a lot of times institutions can't underwrite what a family office can. And I think the other piece of it too is that in many countries around the world, you know, your family offices are born from kind of commercial businesses or industrial businesses that were family owned. And so thinking about the relationship between the source of the wealth and kind of opportunities to decarbonize in that industry or in that sector is oftentimes the most accessible way to effectuate change. What I would add to that is that, we need to now start coalescing capital into the hands of managers, of asset managers that have a plan and that have a demonstrated track record of actually taking climate action and doing so in a way that's most effective. So that's not just a plug for Full Cycle. There are many asset managers in this sector that are doing this work. And so really understanding how you partner with fund managers to go out and be a focus point to then deploy capital in a very meticulous, prioritized manner, private capital. It also means that you'll achieve the financial returns that we should all see by virtue of this very large transition that we are participating in. This will be the largest wealth creation opportunity of our lifetime, but we shouldn't divorce that from the task at hand, which is actual climate action, which is transitioning to a low carbon economy. And so you can achieve both of those things, but not with every investment and not with every manager. And so really just, deep manager research will be important. I think organizations like Drawdown provide a lot of guides for how one can participate in a low carbon transition. And I think that extends out to investors. And per your point earlier, Krista, for individuals who maybe aren't ultra high net worth investors or family offices, right? For folks who are just living their daily lives, the most important thing you can do, the two most important things you can do. One is understand where your capital is parked. That is to say, not all banks and institutions, not all fund managers, not all pensions are the same. And sometimes you might think you're living a decarbonized life, and instead your assets are actually being used to finance oil and gas infrastructure. So having better optics into where your capital is really important. The second most important thing is to vote, as you said earlier, right? Like the climate policies that we, the United States, need to effectuate into the world that will help us honor our commitments that were made in Glasgow and Paris are in the hands right now of 15 to 20 lawmakers who are making a decision as to whether or not we go forward on plans to take climate action, or whether or not those stall. At the local level, it's in the hands of 700 local lawmakers and policymakers who can effectuate your state's or your municipality's ability to face climate change, to build mitigation and adaptation, and to facilitate capital flows into those investments. It's not that many people. And so if we really care about the issue and we're individual citizens, the most powerful thing we can do is be nearly single issue voters and vote where we can freely for candidates that understand climate, understand the issue, and are pro solutions that can actually effectuate change for all of us.
Yeah, totally agree. Back to your point about asset managers, asset managers can't actually invest without the permission of their clients. So as a client, be informed, really, and give your asset manager that type of permission. I think we've reached our time. This has been such a great discussion. I heard an interview with Hiro Mizuno the other day, and somebody asked him, do you think COP26 was a success or a failure? And he said, well, it's really hard to know, but the next 12 months will really will tell us whether it is a failure or a success. And the next 12 months, we need an incredible amount of action. And so this has been a great discussion. And if anybody has any questions, I think feel free to reach out to either of us. And really want to thank Chelsea and the team at Logic Tree, Brian Kurtz, and everybody for having us on. It's been a terrific discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Krista. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.